All right, today we're tackling a really complex and, let's be honest, often controversial area of the law, the statutes that deal with causing harm to an unborn child. We're going to break this down section by section to really get a handle on how the law looks at different actions, different intentions, and of course, different outcomes. So let's get right into it.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the absolute baseline offense, the foundation of it all. Then we'll see how one single factor, consent, just completely changes the game. From there, we'll look at the most tragic outcomes and then unpack some really subtle differences in the final sections. And of course, we'll wrap it all up with the key things you need to remember. Okay, so let's kick things off with Section 88. You can think of this as the cornerstone for all these laws. It defines the fundamental act of causing a miscarriage, and pretty much everything else we're going to talk about today builds on this one section. So the act itself is pretty straightforward, voluntarily causing a woman with child to miscarry. Now there's a huge exception here. If it's done in good faith to save the mother's life, this section doesn't apply. But look at the punishments. They're split in two tiers. The standard is up to 3 years. But if the woman is quick with child, that penalty jumps to a potential 7 years plus a fine. That distinction is a big deal, so let's define what that term actually means. So, quick with child. It's an old legal term. You don't hear much anymore, but it's critical here. It refers to that specific stage in a pregnancy where the mother can actually feel the fetus moving. The law basically sees this as a more advanced, more developed stage. And that's why, as we just saw, it attaches a much heavier punishment to any harm done at this point. And get this, Section 88 has this really interesting little note attached. It says that a woman who causes her own miscarriage falls under this section too. It's a very explicit clarification put there so there's absolutely no doubt about who this law applies to. Okay, moving on to Section 89. This section takes the exact same act we just talked about, causing a miscarriage, but it adds one game-changing element: the absence of the woman's consent. And as you're about to see, this single factor just sends the legal consequences through the roof. So the act is the same, but the circumstance? It's done without the woman's consent. And look at that punishment. It skyrockets from a max of 7 years all the way to potential life imprisonment. Suddenly, it doesn't matter if the woman is quick with child or not. The lack of consent becomes the single most important factor, totally eclipsing everything else. And this slide just lays it out perfectly, doesn't it? It shows you the immense legal weight placed on consent. On the left, with consent, you're looking at a maximum of 7 years. But on the right, without consent, you're looking at life imprisonment. The difference is just staggering, and it shows you that the law views this as a completely different and far more serious crime. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. Life imprisonment. That's a penalty usually reserved for the most serious crimes imaginable. Having it here as the maximum sentence makes a powerful statement about how seriously the law views the violation of a pregnant woman's autonomy. Now we have to consider an even more tragic possibility. Section 90 deals with what happens when an act done with the intent to cause miscarriage ends up causing the death of the woman herself. And you're probably noticing a theme here, right? Once again, it all comes down to consent. If the act was done with her consent, but she dies as a result, the punishment is up to 10 years. But if it was done without her consent, well, there it is again, the potential for life imprisonment. The message from the law is crystal clear and consistent. Now, this is a really critical legal point. To be found guilty under Section 90, the offender only needed to intend to cause the miscarriage. The prosecution doesn't have to prove they knew their actions could actually kill the woman. This is a legal idea sometimes called transferred intent. Basically, the intent to commit that first crime gets transferred over to the much more tragic unintended consequence. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. Sections 91 and 92 move into slightly different territory. We're not talking about ending a pregnancy anymore. We're now looking at acts designed to prevent a child from being born alive or to cause its death right after birth. It's a subtle distinction, but a very important one in the eyes of the law. So Section 91 gets super specific. The act happens before birth, but it's the intent that defines the crime. The whole goal is either to stop the child from being born alive in the first place or to cause its death immediately after. And if that act is successful, and again, wasn't done to save the mother's life, the punishment can go up to 10 years. Okay, hang with me here, because Section 92 is where things get a little more complex, but it's fascinating. It connects the death of a quick unborn child to an act that would have been culpable homicide if the mother had died. Culpable homicide just means causing death through a reckless or negligent act, but without the direct intent to kill. Let's walk through the official example to make this crystal clear.
So let's break this scenario down. First, someone commits a dangerous act against a pregnant woman. Second, the woman gets hurt, but thankfully, she survives. Third, that same act causes the death of the quick unborn child she is carrying. So, what's the verdict? That person is guilty of the offense in Section 92. It's a really unique provision that creates a whole separate crime for this specific outcome, even when the mother lives.
Whew, okay, that was a lot of legal detail. So let's boil it all down. If you're going to walk away from this with anything, what are the key principles you absolutely need to remember?
Okay, here are the 4 big pillars. First, consent is king. Its absence is the #1 factor that triggers the most severe punishments. Second, that term, quick with child, really matters. It's a legal line in the sand that ratchets up the penalties. Third, the specific intent behind the act is what separates the different crimes. And finally, the ultimate outcome, what actually happens to the woman and the child, is what determines the final charge. So when you look at all these laws together, with all their specific definitions and punishments, you start to see the immense challenge they represent. How does a legal system balance protecting a pregnant woman's body and her choices, while also assigning some legal status to an unborn child? There are no simple answers here, and these sections are one legal system's detailed attempt to navigate that incredibly complex and personal space. Thanks for diving in with us.